For the first time in modern history, the financial markets have delivered a stunning verdict. In the eyes of global investors, it is now more expensive for the French government to borrow money than it is for Greece. Let that sink in. France, a founding member of the European Union, a nuclear power, and the bloc's second largest economy, is now considered a riskier bet than a country it once had to bail out. As of early December 2025, the yield on France's 10-year government bond climbed to 3.48%, while Greece's equivalent bond stood lower at 3.37%. In the cold, calculating world of finance, that small difference is a political earthquake. It's a signal that something is deeply broken at the heart of Europe. This isn't just some niche financial story. It's a warning light flashing for the entire global economy. How did the pillar of European stability suddenly become one of its biggest liabilities? We're going to break down exactly how this happened, but first, it's time for a quick coffee. We'll get into the details right after this. To really grasp this, you need to understand what these numbers mean. A government bond yield is basically the interest rate a country pays to borrow. A higher yield means investors are demanding more compensation for what they see as a higher risk. For decades, the pecking order was clear. Germany was the safest bet with the lowest yields. France was right there behind it, a bedrock of stability. Then you had the so-called periphery countries, Greece, Portugal, Spain, Italy, which during the 2011 Eurozone crisis paid astronomically high rates if they could borrow at all. What we're seeing is a fundamental upending of that order. France isn't being grouped with Germany anymore. It's being compared to the very countries it once lectured about fiscal discipline. Bond markets are now pricing French debt as riskier than that of Greece, Portugal, and Spain, countries that were at the epicenter of the last European debt crisis. And this wasn't a slow, gradual shift. It's been a rapid collapse in confidence. On October 17, 2025, the credit rating agency Standard & Poor's downgraded France's debt from AA- to A+, explicitly citing persistent political turmoil and a weakening capacity for reform. Just a month earlier, on September 12th, Fitch had already made a similar downgrade, pointing to the same political gridlock. Then on October 24th, Moody's piled on, changing its outlook for France to negative. These agencies are the referees of international finance, and they just threw a major penalty flag. The message was unmistakable. The political chaos in Paris is making France an unreliable place to lend money. So what's the political turmoil that has the markets so spooked? The crisis really ignited in the summer of 2024 when President Emmanuel Macron, fed up with his inability to pass reforms, took a huge gamble. He dissolved the National Assembly and called a snap election, hoping for a stronger mandate. The gamble backfired, spectacularly. Instead of a majority, the election gave him a hopelessly fragmented parliament, split into three warring factions: Macron's centrist bloc, a coalition of the left, and a powerful bloc of the right and far right. This created the ultimate political gridlock. France now has a government that can't actually govern. Whatever one bloc proposes, the other two can team up to shoot it down. Making coherent policy has become almost impossible. The result? A revolving door of leaders and constant instability. France has burned through 5 prime ministers in less than 2 years, a rate of turnover that has drawn sarcastic commentary from Italy, a country long famous for its own political chaos. The dysfunction was on full display on September 8, 2025, when then Prime Minister François Bayrou called a vote of confidence in his government. He was crushed, getting only 194 votes in favor to 364 against. This isn't just insider politics. This paralysis has direct real-world consequences. Without a functioning majority, the government can't pass a credible budget. It can't implement the reforms needed to control spending. and it can't make the tough decisions required to steer the economy. Investors look at this chaos and see a country that has lost its ability to make choices. And in finance, uncertainty is the single greatest risk there is. While political gridlock is the disease, the symptom is a fiscal crisis that is spiraling out of control. France's public debt has absolutely exploded, now projected to hit nearly 116% of its entire economic output by the end of 2025, almost double the 60% limit required by the EU's own rules. And it's heading in the wrong direction. Projections show that French debt could climb past 120% of GDP by 2027. At the same time, the budget deficit, the gap between what the government spends and what it collects, is projected to be 5.4% of GDP in 2025, again, way above the EU's 3% ceiling. But the most terrifying number is the cost of servicing this mountain of debt. This year, the interest payments on France's debt are expected to hit about 67 billion euros. That's now one of the largest items in the national budget, costing more than almost any single ministry. Projections show these interest payments could soar to 100 billion euros per year by 2029 or 2030. Think about that. 100 billion euros. That's money that can't go to hospitals, police, schools, or infrastructure. It's money that simply vanishes to pay interest on past borrowing. This creates a vicious cycle known as a debt spiral. As debt grows, interest payments rise. As interest payments rise, the government has to borrow even more to cover the gap. This new borrowing in turn leads to even higher interest payments. The downgrades from S&P and Fitch just pour gasoline on this fire by making all future borrowing even more expensive. At the heart of this crisis is a fundamental, almost impossible contradiction. On one hand, France spends more on social protection than almost any other country on earth, at roughly 32% of its GDP. It has one of the world's most generous pension systems. It heavily subsidizes everything from healthcare and childcare to unemployment benefits and transport. On the other hand, French taxes are already among the highest in Europe, standing at nearly 46% of GDP. This creates an inescapable political trap. The public is accustomed to a high level of state support and fiercely resists any attempt to cut it. When Macron tried to raise the retirement age from 62 to 64, a reform most economists saw as essential, the country was paralyzed by months of massive, sometimes violent protests. Even suggesting tiny cuts is enough to bring powerful unions into the streets. Yet raising taxes further is seen as political suicide and economically damaging. The left demands even more spending. The right rejects austerity but also refuses tax hikes. And the center, led by Macron, is trapped in the middle, powerless. France is a nation that has become, as one analyst put it, too generous to cut spending, too exhausted to raise taxes, too divided to reform, and too indebted to keep borrowing freely. The implications of this crisis go far beyond France's borders. When Greece was on the verge of collapse, the fear was a chain reaction across the Eurozone. But France is a different beast entirely. It's the second largest economy in the Euro bloc, larger than the economies of Greece, Portugal, Ireland, and Finland combined. If Greece was a domino, France is the table the dominoes are sitting on. A French debt crisis would be an existential threat to the European Union. There is no bailout fund big enough to save France. The country is, quite literally, too big to fail, but also too big to save. The political uncertainty is already a drag on the region. While the rest of the Eurozone is forecast to grow at around 1.3%, France is lagging far behind, with growth projected to be a mere 0.8% in 2025. As the governor of the Banque de France, François Villeroy de Galhau, has warned, France is creating a wall of debt that will be passed to future generations. So here we are. A founding member of the EU, once a symbol of stability, is now seen by markets as a greater risk than countries it bailed out a decade ago. This alarming role reversal isn't because of a sudden economic shock, but because of a political system that has stopped working. Trapped by its high spending, high taxes, and deep divisions, France's government can't make the hard choices needed to secure its future. The markets have issued their verdict. Investors now fear France's political paralysis more than they fear Italy's massive debt load, because Italy at least has a government with a majority and a plan. France, it seems, has neither. The question is no longer if France has a problem, but whether that problem is containable. The next presidential election in 2027 looms as a potential breaking point. If a new government from either the far left or far right comes to power and tries to implement its expensive promises, economists warn France could face an explosive moment in the bond markets, one that could make the 2011 crisis look like a minor tremor. The idea that Paris might one day need a rescue from the IMF is no longer a fringe theory. It's a scenario being seriously discussed. This brings us to the great unanswered question. Can France's political class find a way out of this deadlock, or are we watching the opening act of the next and potentially final Eurozone crisis? History rhymes. Power rebrands. Stay inquisitive.